I was doing a spots breakdown on lighthouse lakes on my membership page, and one of my members had a really good question, and I thought it would be helpful to explain it to a lot of y'all. So a lot of y'all that have been watching me know that that I base my decision on where I'm going to fish mostly on wind direction and wind speed, because I'm a kayak fisherman. But there's a lot of other things to consider with tides, and for me it's more important about the tide level because I'm a shallow water fisherman. So it doesn't really matter to me if the tide's going in or going out. I would definitely prefer it to be moving. You want some moving water, but the most important thing for me is that tide level. And unfortunately, the tide charts are based on historical data when it comes to the tide level. So whenever you have weather changes and wind direction changes, you could have storms, big storms out in the Gulf that can affect the tide level. So some of those are, in the wintertime, we have a lot of northern winds and we have really low tides. The days when that wind's blowing 25 miles an hour, coming out of the north or northern, it blows out all the water. We lose water in our back lakes. I can't get in there with a kayak. There's no way to get in there. And then sometimes they turn back south in the winter for a day or two, and those tides come back in a little bit. So the weather and the wind does affect the tide levels. And so yeah, I don't follow the tide charts anymore. They just don't do enough for me to want to follow them. So what I figured out, and it works pretty good for me, is to fish and pick my area based on what the tide is doing when I get there, in the tide level. So if I get there, and all of my areas, they have deeper water somewhere, and then they have shallow water somewhere. Everything I fish has every scenario I need it to have. So when I get there, I get to the launch and I go down and I look at the water level. That's the first thing I do, is I look at the water level, and I think, okay, where can I get into today? And we are getting into springtime, so we're getting warmer water temps, and the fish are in shallow, with the warmer water temps. So it was a little different in the wintertime because the water in shallow was too cold, and I wasn't locating as many fish. But since we're getting into spring, we'll stay to some spring patterns, and those spring patterns are, we're going to start getting more south winds. Our tides are going to come back in. We're going to be able to get into all the shallow stuff. And we do sometimes have a pretty low tide, in the spring or summertime. It doesn't ever really get like a wintertime low tide. So in the summer, I can pretty much get into a lot of stuff that I couldn't get into in the wintertime. But that doesn't mean I can get into every lake. Not all of the lakes always have enough water to get into them. So I get back to the launch and the tide level. I look at the tide level and I just know which lakes I can get into based on that tide level. So it's more important to like I said, to fish based on what's given to you that day. It doesn't mean it's the end of the day because you got there and there's no water. That's a good thing for me anyways. It's a good thing that the tides are really, really low. I love a really low tide because it pushes all those fish out of those lakes and it puts them in the creek or in the creek mouth or in the bay that's outside of the marsh. Or if you're fishing in grass flat areas, some of the real shallow flats won't have enough water on them, and all those fish will be pushed off onto that edge. There's always a drop off somewhere nearby, pretty much, except for if you're talking about a marsh lake in general. They're all pretty much relatively close to the same depth. But then you have some of the bigger lakes that you can get into on a pretty low tide, but you can't get into the other lakes. There's some other little lakes that I fish, and for those the tide has to be really high. So I have several different lakes I fish, several different scenarios and spots for all of these circumstances. And you know, a lot of times I do have a certain plan in mind, and you know, maybe I did really good yesterday in this one lake and I want to hit it again, and I get there and I realize there's not going to be enough water in that lake. So it's not the end of the day. You just have to change from you know, fishing an average tide to, well, now I'm gonna have to fish based on a low tide. So I'm gonna give you some scenarios. I choose Mission Bay quite a bit. I don't fish here, but it has good, perfect scenarios for me to show y'all. You know, I've only fished it like once or twice because, you know, it's pretty far to get to with a kayak. But so let's say, you know, the tide is really, really low. All of these lakes over here that are brownish in color, all of this brown color is your real shallow lake. This is really shallow, and on a higher tide, you can definitely get in here and fish. And then you notice a color difference on this lake right here. This lake has a little bit more greenish color. It's a little bit deeper than this part of the lake over here. So this part of the lake is your deeper lake, you know, and maybe I was catching them right here yesterday, and then now today I can't get in there because it's too freaking low. But that's okay, because if I can't get in there with a kayak, chances are the reds can't get in there either, although they can get shallower than we can. So, but a whole bunch of those fish that were in this lake are now going to drop out into this lake, the little bit deeper one. And if this lake was to get too low, this big lake in here, then they're gonna drop out into this even bluer water, which is this gut right here, and into this creek mouth and into this part of the bay. So they will be outside of here. And you can tell the color difference right here is a little bit bluer than this lake right here. So you got three different colors here and three different scenarios. And they are all different depths, and it may not be a big difference. It could just be 5 inches, but that's to me, that's a big difference. So another good scenario is to fish this river. You know, this river has some green water. It's pretty deep. You know, it's at least a few feet deep for sure. You know, over 3 feet, and then you can fish outside of the river mouth, all of this area right here. So it depends on where you fish, and I'll show y'all some grass flat scenarios too, if you don't ever fish any marsh. So, and then whenever the tides come back in and they're higher, then I will want to go deep off into this stuff. All of these areas in here are really, really shallow because of the color, the brown color that you see. So this is all real shallow right in there. And when the tides are really high, this is where I want to go, and this is where the redfish want to go, and the drum. They want to go to the stuff that they couldn't get into before. I guess it's just new opportunities for bait fish for them to get, you know. So for whatever reason, they like to push in far on a high tide, and I'll go in there with them, you know. So if you fish grass flats, we'll just take brown and root flats here for an example. All this brown color is real shallow, and all this flat in here is pretty dang shallow. And if it's too shallow to get in there and too shallow for the fish to get in there, then they're going to drop off in this blue water over here. So you can fish anywhere in here or anywhere that there is blue color on Google Earth. It all takes a little bit of Google Earth reading and putting together a plan and putting together backup plans. But one way or another, I'm going to be able to fish somewhere. The tide will never make it to where I cannot fish, to where I go out there and I say, oh, let me load the kayak back up. I just cannot fish anywhere here. So, I mean, I always have, in all the areas I fish, they always have, you know, different situations. They have different water levels, you know. So, to me, it's more about you know, seeing what's going on right then and there, and then make a decision. So Lighthouse Lakes is also a pretty shallow area. All of this is Lighthouse Lakes. And if you cannot get into Lighthouse Lakes, then probably the reds are not in there either. So they'll come out of Lighthouse Lakes through all these guts. You got a gut there. You got a gut right there. You can see the blue water going through these two little mangrove islands. And that blue water means that current has been coming in and out of there. That's where the water goes in and out. So if it was an outgoing tide, if I was gonna fish Lighthouse Lakes and I seen that that water's rushing out of there, then I'm gonna fish areas like this. You know, it's basically like a creek mouth. I'm gonna fish out in here. All that bait is getting funneled out, and the fish will be stacked up, you know, waiting for that bait to come out and get an easy meal. So, and then if the tide's going in, then I'll go up into these lakes and fish the little lakes that Lighthouse has to offer. So some more example of some guts and some cuts is right here. You got that blue color. Once again, that's where that tide's going in and out of these lakes, and they're just, you know, all over the place. You got another one right there. You got one right here. there. You know, so there's plenty of opportunities to find and catch some fish, no matter what the tide level is. So we're getting into spring and springtime patterns. The reds are they're feeding on little bitty bait. All of the bait just hatched, and the bait is little, and trying to match the hatch of something so small is pretty difficult. I am using little 3-inch lures right now, soft plastics. Also topwaters, the smallest topwater you can find. I picked up a couple today that I'm going to try out, so I'll show y'all what I have in mind. It's a Super Spook Boyo. I guess that's how you say it. It's a little bitty topwater lure. It's probably 3 inches. Yeah, it's 3 inches. So it was the smallest topwater lure I could find. I'm going to start throwing those. And then for the soft plastics, you know, just things like little bitty shrimp lures or little paddle tails. I picked up some more of the chicken boy shrimp, and they're real small. This is the smallest lure probably that I can throw. So if you get any smaller than that, you're probably talking about fly fishing. So if you're a fly fisherman right now, it's a good time to throw those little flies and catch some redfish and some drum in shallow. So I have a couple of down south lures I'm going to be throwing, and one of them is the burner shad, and it's a little bitty 3-inch paddle tail. So these will work, you know, and that's a 3-inch, and this is the down south 5-inch. So pretty big difference on the size there. So, you know, I am going more and more to smaller lures. You know, there's times when the big lures do not work for me, and there's times that they do. So, but it seems like I'm always downsizing and doing better. So definitely getting ready to get a for real light tackle setup, meaning I'm gonna have to spend a little bit of money. But what I'm using right now is just a Daiwa Exceller 2500 with 10-pound braid, and I'm just tying these lures straight to the braid. I don't use leaders. So, and then another thing with springtime is we're gonna start to have more south winds. The tides will start to come back in, and we're going to be able to fish a lot of stuff that we were not able to fish most of the winter time. So definitely looking forward to spring. I love the warmer weather, and so do the reds and the drums. So another thing about springtime is it can be windy. So you got to kind of pick your day. You know, usually early in the morning is your calmest wind speed, and on the days when it's going to pick up pretty strong, it usually picks up by 9 or 10 a.m. So you may only have a few hours of comfortable fishing. You know, in the morning in the springtime. But there are some days when it's not that windy. So we got quite a few of those, and then we got quite a few days where it's windy. So if you just have a paddle kayak, then you should plan your trip based on the wind direction and check the hourly forecast, and hopefully the wind is not going to shift directions for the time that you're going to be out there. If you look at the hourly forecast and 7 a.m. it says 5 miles an hour, and then you get to about 10 a.m. it says 15 miles an hour, then you want to try to go against that 5 mile an hour wind early in the morning when it's pretty calm, and then come back with that strong 15 mile an hour wind. So even with a pedal drive kayak, I still sometimes plan my trips like this. So I just don't want to I don't really want to go against over 15 mile an hour winds, but I do pretty often. I do fish up to about 18, and I will fish 20 mile an hour wind if I can pick an area that is completely protected the whole way, which is what I'm going to do tomorrow. So we got some pretty strong winds tomorrow, but the area that I picked, it's going to be protected. So you just have to plan your day based on all of these, and the most important thing is to be safe about it. And if you're unsure, then I just wouldn't go out if it's going to pick up over 12 miles an hour if you're not sure about protected water and stuff like that. So I would say 12 miles an hour is definitely doable, and it can be a little tough on a kayak fisherman, but if you only had a paddle. But if you have a pedal drive, you can do quite a bit more. So I hope some of the tips were helpful. Thanks for watching, and tight lines, y'all.